Well, welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Dana and Rachel. We are continuing our conversation about The Whistleblower by Robert Peston. And this is, I know, listen, I was smooth on that delivery.
Nailed it. Oh man, just like butter.
You know what I'm saying? We are continuing this conversation. I think I keep saying over and over again, this is a Rachel pick. You will know based on the look on my face.
I don't think anyone was under any illusions about whose book. I think even this far in the podcast, what are we, 4 months or something into the podcast? They know. We started with Ninth House. They know when it's like, Rachel picked that book, didn't she? Like, I feel like they can smell it from a mile away.
I'll just be thinking, like, who is this woman? Who is she? I'm just, every book I'm learning more and more. You would think I don't know yet. But at the same time, I can appreciate it for what it is. But girl, I would have never picked up this book in a million years. So with that said, we are going to get into our conversation on characters today. And I will say that historically, we've pretty much have talked about our protagonist, and I'm pretty sure we'll do a little bit of the same because he is so complex. And this really is a great story to think about having not just a flawed hero, but one that just has his, I think they all have quirks. I just think he goes beyond quirks. So we'll talk about that. But before we get into our episode, Rachel, you said you had some questions you wanted to ask about.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Come on, bring it.
Yes. All right. Okay. So speaking of, listen, we've got Rachel picks and we've got Dana picks. So after our conversation on the things we never got over, I decided to pick up The Things We Hide from the Light, which is the second book in the series. And I was looking at it for a client who has kind of a stronger female protagonist in it as a part of like a romance in her story. And so I picked this one up, and the pacing has got my brain can't quite figure out what's going on with the pacing. And I knew I wanted to ask you about it. So I thought this would be a great place to sort of like have our chit chat about this book, because I'm confused. So let me just probably there's going to be some spoilers, everybody. So if you haven't read it, just either skip ahead or just know that it's going to be spoiled, or aspects of it might be spoiled. But essentially, everything happens at weird times. Okay, so Nash and Lena, they kind of have a decent sort of friendship in the beginning. And it's, they have kind of a thing that just sort of works for them, even though it's a bit weird. And even Nash is like, I don't know, I know this is unusual, but I need your help. And so we have some fun, like, embarrassing, weird, like sexy scenarios that are kind of, a part of our like romance and setting up that promise. But then they like, quote unquote, break up at like, I don't know, 35% or something, like really early. They become estranged from each other, and it acts almost like the breakup. And then so we spend like, I don't know, 40% of the book and they're feuding, and then it's like 60 to 70% where they get together. And so I haven't finished the book yet. So I don't know, I would guess 75 to 80% of the way through. And my question at this point is, okay, are they gonna break up again? And then they have to get back together? Have we already had the breakup? Like, the order of things feels all over the place. And like they get get together, and again, it's like 60 to 70% of the way through the book. And then they have like their actual like intimate encounters, and they're like, we're sort of a thing now. And I'm just confused. Like, this is not pacing the way I'm familiar with pacing in any romance ever. Can you explain everything? Help.
Well, right. I don't know if I can explain everything, but I'll try my absolute best. One of the things that I always say about that story is that I would never want that to be the story that people lead into, because it is a book too. And one of the things that you notice about that particular series is that they are interconnected. You could read them out of order, but it would be much better in order. And I think on one hand, and so on one hand, you have what that story serves in its own individual capacity as far as Nash's and Lena's journey. But then you also have the fact that that story is a bridge between something that feels very rom-com and something that almost feels like dark romance. And I think that is something, whether she thought about that in the beginning or not, who knows? But it's sort of like this bridge. And I think in some ways, to me, it had to get a little bit darker, but at the same time, I think this is one of those stories that it's a true testament that you've got to let it be true to the character's journey. And this is one of those times where it just doesn't go to the status quo. And I'll give you a correlation. I always think about in Pride and Prejudice that both Lizzie and Mr. Darcy go through the same type of journey, but they get there at different times, right? He knew he loved her early on. Lizzie was a little bit slow on the uptick, right? And I think that's what you have here. And because this literally picks up where the first book left off, you can't believe it's going to be all sunshine and roses, because Nash is dealing with something that's very real, depression. He's dealing with the injury and healing, and self-doubt of like not knowing. And you have someone like Lena who's dealt with health issues and the sort of mental acrobats that come with not feeling 100% whole, or not 100% being given freedom, or people not seeing her as being a person, but as in seeing her through the lens of her condition. And so I think a lot of that had to work itself out. And so with the timing, I believe that journey felt a little bumpy. And in the beginning of that book, I was just like, listen, this is, I do not like sad books. This is doing too much. I'm almost crying on every scene. This is doing too much. I know. And they'd be like, listen, that, and also that I think it does something kind of a little wishy-washy to your brain of like making question whether you feel like he's where he needs to be as a man to be in pursuit of a forever love. And it's like,
I have definitely had those moments. I'm glad that you just mentioned that, because there's some moments where he's like, I physically need you. And I'm like, that doesn't seem good. Like, that doesn't seem healthy. I don't feel good about this.
It's like struggle love. That's what they call that, struggle love. And I think of a lot of ways is like you had to have somebody like Lena who had her own health issues to understand, and also that it just gets a little bit questionable there. So I think in the end, you just got to take it that you do hit all the points. The points are just not in order like we normally see them. I also, again, believe that we had to go through sort of like a different type of journey, because if you really think about it, Things We Never Got Over is rom-com. It is bright. She's got daisies in her hair. She looks at the world, the rose, tinted lenses. And to get to, and now because you've read book 3, to get to Lucian's story, and to have the same reader to be able to go to a place where there's abuse, there is a lot of darkness, and there is a strong enemies to lovers line, and things that they really do have to mentally get over. I think she needed something that almost felt as if it made it so that by the time we get to Lucian, it actually levels the playing field, right? And then it sort of like puts us back at almost like a norm. So I think it also is a great book if you are someone that you want to write something that's angsty. And I would really even want to look at like when that book was released, because for a while there, not connected to the pandemic, we had a lot of angsty stuff. And then after the pandemic, a lot of people didn't want that because we had so much darkness and so much uncertainty due to our collective experience, during the pandemic. And so I think what that story does is it's like this sort of bridge. The final thing that I think that it does, and it does well, is it shows like a clearer depiction of healing. Right? Because if you think about the journey that Nash went through, if you look at Knox and even look at Lucian, Knox was separated from it. he had to come to some different conclusions, but he was on the other side of it. Lucian was separated by time, proximity, his father being in prison, and all of that. Like, he had already decided he was done with that. Now he had to separate himself from the fact that it was his fault, or he could have done something different, like not understanding that he was a child in that position. And so basically, again, coming to different conclusions based upon the facts from the perspective of an adult, instead of relying on your conclusions as a child. But for Nash, it is present and accounted for right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very recent trauma that he is still trying to work through.
It touches his person, it touches his health, it touches his profession. It touches everything that makes him feel like I'm supposed to be protecting. How can I protect somebody if I can't even protect myself? And the fact that she allowed the panic attacks on the page. Yeah. When he had that one and he crumbled to the floor, I was like, oh, girl, listen. Yeah. I was, oh my gosh, get up, Nash. Get up, Nash. Yeah. Listen, so I think that's what it is. And honestly, I would if I ever had the opportunity to interview her, I would love to ask about that, because I would venture to say that went in a direction that even she didn't know, but she stayed true to his journey. Because if you look at her other books, you don't see any other ones that go there. And even in some cases, it's even a little bit darker than Lucian. Yeah. Because it's almost like depressive darkness. Yeah. Just and he was that way for a while. And I think it's just reality. You're not better. Turn the page, they're better. Unless you fast forward years, and the connection of that overarching plot line meant that that was just the following day or the next month.
Yeah, yeah. And it would have been insincere, right? I think, to the nature of a problem like that, to be like, oh, look, he met a nice lady and now he's better. Like, she helps, but he still has a healing journey, like, that she is a part of, rather than like, true love is going to solve your panic attacks. You know, that would feel unfair, I think, to the trauma that, particularly that she opens up by, like you said, showing us panic attacks on the page and really trying to dive into what that experience has done to Nash and his sense of self and his sense of like internal stability. I have one question. Do you think that this book, as is, minus like continuity stuff, do you think this book would have worked as a standalone, or would the beats need to have shifted around and been different to be a standalone?
Yeah. I wouldn't have ever done that as a standalone unless you are known for someone that has a more angsty book. I think she had to sandwich that in between, because we fell in love. And this is where, listen, you're not asking me this, but you're going to get this for free. This is where understanding where your series is going is so key, that it will allow you to do something like this, to be able to play with an area that you normally wouldn't go into, because you're sort of sandwiching it between two experiences that people already want. We wanted Sloane and Lucian from the first time that they went at each other. We already knew that. So I think we already knew, and knowing how you set your series up and how you do cameos to set those characters up so that we are interested in them is a key. Because think about this. The setup for Nash was nothing like his book. We knew Nash as the nice tush Nash. Yeah. Okay. Like, he wasn't this emotional, like, feeling not stable.
He was like the nice guy. He was like the good guy. Like, Knox was like the badass with the tattoos, and then Nash was the very like straight lace, like clean cut guy. I was not prepared to get into his story, and he's like, the darkness is calling me, and I'm like, good Lord, this is a different person than I met in the last book.
I told you. And so with that said, I feel like if it was a standalone, it really would have had to been to Bran. I think Lucy Score has enough books underneath her belt that have a sense of variance that she can get away with that. Also,
Yeah.
the fact that you had already built and established a community that people liked, loved, and wanted more of. And she
Yeah.
really had to take advantage of those things and take advantage of even the moments like when they go to they go to Knox's house and he's like, look, y'all need to get y'all stuff
Yeah.
together. Oh no, that was in three. But the point is, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think
They have that
having,
moment in the second one too, where
yeah,
Knox is like, "Seriously, guys, why always up against the wall? What is happening? Stop it!"
and I think that's it. Like, I think to be able to offset it if that's not your brand, having some of those moments, but not making them feel like whiplashy.
Yeah.
But here, I think she got away with it because it was in a very popular series. It was sandwiched
Yeah.
between two books. And at the end of the day, each one of those books are technically in a different niche. And
Yeah.
they're connected by her being really true to the main male character's story. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody kind of changes, but Knox is, and then Nash is, and then Lucian's, because Lucian's is kind of that way too. Because I was like, listen, when when Knox broke up with her with that time, and then went out there and girl, listen, I was like, I can't do this. I cannot do this.
Yeah.
I was trying to read them in order. I'm like, listen, you about to lose me. You are about to lose me. And what's funny is we did the whole series as a book club in DTW, or
Yeah.
our whole community did it. And that was the same thing. People were just like, oh my gosh. Like, so, being able to talk about that and being able to reason, would I recommend it? No, never. I
Yeah.
would never recommend that. But I think because she does such an amazing job with characters and that it always felt authentic to his journey, it kind of felt like you kind of feel bad for wanting him to like get up already.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm sure there's probably some people that like, oh wow, that feels like a representation of what my life experience is like.
Yeah.
And I think the last part of it would be this question of, it's sort of like this book that we're about to talk about, of like, why do you read and what are your expectations as a reader? And I personally don't like reading sad stuff. And I'm reading for pleasure and escapism, and that is not where I want to escape to. You can miss me
Yeah.
on that. And I think that's the other part, right? But I think over the years, she's established a relationship with her readers that we go where she's taking us because it is about the characters. But I don't
Yeah.
know of any others that have been that
Yeah.
emotionally charged.
Okay.
Yeah, ever. I don't think so. And I haven't read all of her books, but I've read a few. And I
Yeah.
think that was just one of those where she probably was like, I just got to stay true
Yeah.
to his story.
I think that something that is really helpful when you're looking at kind of like phenomena like this, and when you're thinking about, you see a writer do something unusual and you're like, well, actually it kind of worked, and you kind of, you're willing to go with them there. The thing that I think is really helpful to like consider, especially if you're like a newer writer, in your first couple of books, to know that in order to do that kind of stuff, most of the time you have to establish trust with your readers beforehand.
That's
Right?
right.
So like, you don't necessarily like, and I say this as very general advice, because the thing is like, are you gonna have the one-off person who writes that book and it's their debut and everybody loves it and it's like a whole thing? Yes. But on the whole, when you're writing your first novel, your first couple of novels, you want to establish trust with your readers, that you know what you're doing, that you're going to pay off all of your setups, you're going to take them on a journey that's going, to be satisfying, it's going to conclude. And like, this is my favorite example of this is like Brandon Sanderson, right? So he wrote Mistborn, he also wrote Way of Kings and the Stormlight Archives, right? And he wrote obviously a gazillion other things as well. But like, in his lectures back in 2020, he even says if you haven't read any of my stuff before, don't start with Stormlight Archive, because Stormlight Archive is like me getting to go full Brandon Sanderson, but don't read that until you know that you can trust me as an author to deliver on everything I'm setting up, that I'm going to pay all of it off, that it's going to be like, that I am going to pay off the 50 hours you spent on this first book alone. And so when you're writing, you know, you want to, like, you want to find those places where you can innovate and you can bring something new, but you also want to make sure you're hitting your beats and you're hitting your pacing right and you're hitting your characters right, so that in the future, if you decide you kind of want to experiment, you want to try something a little, like, you know, off the cuff or anything like that, your readers know that they can trust you and they will go for the ride with you. And so that's, you know, when we're looking at like a Lucy Score book, or a Leigh Bardugo book, or right, any of these really well-established authors, I think it's worth keeping in mind that they're well-established authors and they have a readership that trusts them. And that's really, I think, an important thing to just be aware of when we're talking about books like these. And the same thing for Robert Peston as well. He is an established writer, even though this was his debut fiction. He is an established journalist that already people were following and fascinated by his take and his perspective on things. So.
Yeah, well, you know, we teach a lot about this in DTW and in our mentorship. I think the biggest thing about this is it comes down to, why are you doing it, right? You can write a story and do whatever the heck you feel like it, just because that's what you feel like. And I would say, do you, boo. But if you are aiming to have a profitable career, or you're aiming to make it a full-time gig, then this is a two-way street. It is both craft and it's business. It's both creative and it's about them dollars, right? Like it's it's a little bit both. And also in that scenario that you painted, you know, someone who is published by someone else has a different access, and they have different. They don't have the same considerations always that someone who is independently published or have a small publisher, because you want that promise of the brand, you as the author, and the promise of the genre locked in. You want them locked in. And my thing to my clients is this: you want to get to the point where your clients or your readers can one-click you without reading your blurb. The moment you break that promise, then that means when they see your thing come up, they may say, oh, I'm going to get that, but I don't have time to read the blurb right now. I'll come back later. You've lost it. Yeah. You've lost it because you broke that trust. So two things, and then we'll get to the thing. One is, as a reader, one of my favorite authors, she is one of my favorite authors. And one day I got to the point where, okay, she's one of my favorites. Okay, I can one-click her. I can maybe skim the blurb. Oh, this sound like me. Click. Then I read one of her stories. The blurb said one thing, and when I got in that story, it was something else. Do you know that I've never one-clicked her again? Ever.
Oh, no.
And I still love her books, but I will, if I don't have time to read through and make sure, and then go to the the reviews, I will not buy her book. So that was my experience as a reader, and it really helps me as someone who is helping people, because here's the thing that does, if they cannot trust you and they cannot one-click you, is the fact that your progression for your ability to be profitable and to earn and to scale is diminished. Because basically you are working harder. They've got to see you more often. And then what happens on another part of this that people forget, but I think is totally adjacent, is that if you don't deliver on the same or similar promise across all of your books, then it's hard for people to jump from book to book to book. If I know I liked your last book and I know I liked this book, then I'm going to go ahead. Ooh, this was good. Let me find another one by her or him. Yeah. And so what happens is you diminish your ability to be profitable by doing that. The final example that I'll say is I experienced this as a writer. So I decided, I've been doing too much. So I decided I wanted to be a part of this collaboration that was for Reverse Harem. I always wanted to do a reverse harem. I was so excited
about this.
I was so excited. I was reading all of these reverse heroines, which my eyeballs was popping out. But you know what? I was committed. And I write the story. I end up loving the story. And my readers, like people who knew me already, was like giving me 4 stars. It was like, this is good, but wait, what happened? And then people who didn't know was like, five. Where did these 2 other, body parts come from? And it was just, so I learned, like I had to learn the hard way. And that's why when people are saying like, why do you have so many pen names or whatever? Because I like to tell different stories, and my stories will come into my mind according to the brand. And there are some people that can get away with having multiple things. And people always like to say Colleen Hoover or whatever in my world, right? But the reality is most people who hopscotch around like that, their journey is longer. Now, the good thing is if that's their jam, then they are excited about what's she going to do this time. But for most people in romance, we pick it for nostalgia. That's not nostalgia.
Yeah. And
the way she even does genre matching, that is what makes people really upset, because it reads like a romance. But when you read it, this ain't no romance, right? Like,
yeah.
So I think you just have to, it's almost like you have to choose your battles. And if you're someone who you are building and establishing a brand, I always feel like that is not a battle that you do now. Hold on to that story. Do enough so your readers can be there for you. And not just for the actual content. And in the beginning, you're riding on the content because they don't know who you are. And that's okay. That's what's going to help you get sales, because nobody knows you. But if you are leaning into the market in the niche, then they can still get a wonderful reading experience and done in a way that you do it. And then they will go to other books. And so, yeah. That was a long discussion to say. I think that is a huge topic, and it's a big consideration. And I think sometimes people think that they're either selling out or it's less creative. But I think it's like any relationship. If you are building a relationship with a friend, you come up and be sporadic if you want to. I don't know that person. I don't know what I'm going to get from this day to the next. And that's you doing too much. But there is something about building it. And if you build that relationship, then in time, you do get the opportunity to explore other things. Or you do like I do, of like, okay, like I explore it, but I explore it within these parameters. This is our sandbox. And then if I want to do something else, like have a story about, a mermaid or a wolf shifters, I just got to do it under a different pen name.
Yeah. Man, that's so good. I feel like this could honestly be just a full bonus episode that we cut out, and we are like, on some extra week, we're like, here's a little something extra. Because we went all the way in, but that was really helpful, because I was feeling like again, just going back to the things we hide from the light, I was like, this feels wonky. Like I get it in its context, but I'm like, I bet you Dana wouldn't recommend that your average writer just write this book, especially just like on its own. So that was really helpful to like double check, like, ooh, is there a trope that I'm not understanding, or like there's like some secret romance sauce that it's like, I haven't been introduced to this one. Nope. And I will say even here, the reason why I think this is good to be here is because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is if you decide you want to tell these types of stories, what are the things that you need to consider? And a lot of times we can read books that are considered masterworks and there are bestsellers, but we are also not fully taking into context the context in which they've done that. We are looking at an individual book, but there are so many different elements and levers that are being pushed, pulled, and tweaked to be able to make that a full experience. And we are just on the receiving end of it. And so none of this is done in a bubble, right? It really is done in alignment with everything else. And even when you talk about people like Brandon Sanderson, again, another one of those books that you got me reading. When you talk about somebody like that,
he will even go there, but he understands this. He understands what his reader promise is. And that man does not play about that. And he also don't play about, if this ain't for you, this ain't for you. And that's because he understands that. And I think it is a great, interesting conversation to have as we go into talking about characters for the whistleblower, because I find that he is a very unique character, but I think he's also a unique character in a space where a lot of the stories are really more centered on the plot, not necessarily the characters. And Peston, he found a way to actually blend this, and he did it based on, if you listen to our last episode talking about the plot, as Gil is going through this process of both doing his job as an investigative political journalist and trying to find out the circumstances around his sister's death. And so he's taking a chance, because you have someone that is going through this process through a lens of grief. Lens of grief for somebody who don't even like people to touch him. Unless he doing the hibbity-dibbity because he have that. But, you know, that
make an exception for that one, you know. In all fairness, Lena makes the exception too, so there's some precedent here.
But that it is also a part of it, and it's also there are times where he's questioning it as to whether that is affecting his judgment, and if that's affecting his reasoning. And even people try to use that even when he's on to something to make him question. And I think knowing that, because I think that is also a gamble here, because having someone that has, you know, in the moment starts crying, you're like, wait a minute, where did tears come from?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it makes him feel very real. And I think it's what makes him stay, his coming to terms of this relationship and the estrangement of that relationship is also what fuels him to get answers and do justice, and about how it's done. Like, it's to honor the life and the spirit of how his sister would have wanted this to happen. And I think that causes him to become a different kind of man at the end of the story.
Yeah, well, and what's important about this, and we're kind of just gonna leap, I think, right into it. What's important about this is this connects directly to his wrestle with his relationship to his work. And we touched on that a little bit last week, of talking about how, you know, he is in this world and he's seeing himself as different from these kind of power players who are making all of these moves and manipulating people. And he comes to have to confront that he's not so different from the people, that he is like, oh, I'm gonna get the truth on these people because people deserve to know, and this is what they're doing. And he has to realize that he is a player in this environment. And so and this connects to the death of his sister and him having to relate and process this, because what caused the estrangement in the first place was his relationship to his work. So his sister, right, is killed, and they were estranged, but they were close before. And so the case and the investigation of what his sister knew and what actually happened to her is forcing him to confront that relationship with his sister and confront his grief, rather than being able to work himself into oblivion and pretend it's not there, because the investigation is directly related to the story around what his sister was pursuing. And this is bringing him into, so confronting his grief, confronting his relationship with his sister, which all stems back to decisions that he made relative to his work. And so all of these things are interconnected. And what they're doing is we're seeing him change, and we're also seeing the ugly parts of Gil Peck, which is an opportunist, he can be manipulative, often self-serving, And so we're watching this happen, but what we're also watching happen, and this is how you're kind of taking this unlikable character and bringing us along for a ride as we begin to see him shift, because he begins to be, it sort of prompts self-reflection and makes him think twice before he makes decisions. And sometimes he still chooses the wrong thing, but we're watching him sort of, he'll choose the wrong thing, and then we'll watch him sort of reap the consequences of that, and he will begin to connect it back to, yep, I messed up. That was on me, and I screwed it up. And then the next time we see him choose a little differently and a little differently, and just trying. So what it does is he is really, he's a tough protagonist to take. Again, he's not really a likable person, but we begin to watch someone unlikable confront the things that are making them behave in unlikable ways, and try to choose differently and get it right some of the time and get it wrong some of the time. And it begins to, if we don't all the way like Gil, we begin to sympathize, because we're watching someone attempt to do better and struggle to do that, right? And so I think that this is really a part of creating also this very emotional story, because I think even with someone who is as much of a piece of work as Gil Peck, we can all understand realizing that we have hurt people and trying to do better, and sometimes failing in that, but wanting to do differently and wanting to do better, right? And so we're just watching, and because we're in first person present, right, we get a front row seat to all of Gil's issues and Gil's perspective on his own issues, and him engaging with the situations and engaging with his own flaws in that process of changing. And I think it makes it very intimate in that way.
I agree. As someone, again, like y'all, I'm gonna keep saying it because I don't know when you gonna come in on these episodes, that this is not my jam. I don't want to say I didn't like it, but I just wouldn't have picked this book. But for me, a person who loves creating dynamic characters, this was just like Kid in a Candy Store. One of the things that I didn't necessarily equate him to being unlikable, I equated him to being, this is the adult version of someone who experienced trauma that was never healed. Because a lot of the way that he approaches his profession is because I was never good at that. I could never do better than, smarter than, get the thing that my sister did, but I can do this, and I'm good at this. And I feel like what happens is that became the benchmark that seemed like the norm, right? It's almost like the wound that became the sense of normalcy. And so therefore, it wasn't until he no longer had the buffer of her that he had to begin to address things as they were. And that meant addressing himself. And so seeing it like that, then a lot of the things that he starts to remember, and even to the point where there was a moment in the story where I was like, oh, like you wouldn't spend a lot of time on it, but that would be just a whole thought of like two key moments when he was having a conversation with Marilyn, and he was just like, I'm not here to talk about a story. I'm here to talk about what I'm going through, like about me. And for the first time, the story wasn't the lead. Right? Like getting the answers wasn't the lead. It was like, wait, what am I like trying to process, and no longer process just in himself, but out loud, so that he could get an understanding. So that was one moment. And then another moment was when he was having a conversation, and I can't remember the quote, so I know I'm gonna fluff it up, but it was like a moment when he said something to the effect of you can never, something like money can never be exclusive of the people, or it was when he was talking to the politician, and he ended up quoting his father when he said, no, I never read the book because I lived it. And in that moment, he not only showed his relationship with his father and his father's pursuit of a profession, and how it affected him, but also almost like a full circle moment because it showed that the work ethic and the thing that his father taught him was in him. And
Yeah.
that's you talk about some other level stuff because that's the thing where you think my parents I'm gonna do my own thing and he's seeing where in real life circumstances what his father meant in a way where it's affecting real people right now. And that book may have been back then and you experienced it through the lens of a child, but now you're seeing what he was talking about. And I think for all of that, the fact that we're getting these and there are snippets and there are these blimps of moments that are being the undercurrent of him still being at the height of his career and someone who is is known, he has a name for himself. He's pretty much able to do just about anything that he wants to do within his profession because he has earned that. And now that he had such a sense of surety and security in is now feeling shaky.
Yeah.
And it's shaky. Well, on one hand, it's shaky because of the grief, but on the other hand, people wanted to think it's because of the grief, and it's because, for real, he's on to something. And we get to experience that in him. And so what it makes me think of when we talk about characters and the development of characters is beginning to be really clear about what those layers are that you want to pursue in the story. And what does that journey look like? I think a lot of times people think it's this one singular linear thing, and it is delivered that way in a story, but it doesn't usually start off that way, right? You can say like, what does he want in his career? What does he want in his life as a man? What does he want in his relationship with his parents? What does he want in his relationship with his sister, right? And understanding what does he want in his relationship with Jess? What does he want in his relationship? Because even in those relationships, you saw a different type of Gil show up, and we saw a different type of Gil with Jess, and we saw a different Gil with Marilyn, and all of that, I think shows that Peston made a person that was very complex, even if he seemed, I don't want to say simple-minded, but I don't know, like he seemed in the beginning like he had one focus, and he did, but that was because it was a coping mechanism, and it was the thing that he felt like he could control.
Yes. Yeah. 100%.
And that's not easy to write.
Yeah. Well, and so there's like a couple of like things that are happening with that. So number one, generally in a crime story, we are going to be much more plot forward, plot driven, plot focused. So that means that a lot of what's happening in your protagonist is plot centric, which means job and investigation centric. However, what Peston did, I think, really masterfully is, just to your point, like, we start being job centric because that is the thing that Gil has. Especially before his sister dies, it's his whole world, and he has sacrificed everything for this one thing that he is good at. But then the investigation, and again, this is what's so masterful, I think, about the way that the book was written, is that the investigation forces him to confront other aspects of his world, and it begins to open up Gil in other facets of himself. So we get memories of Claire. It forces him into more contact with his parents than he strictly prefers, because he tries to keep his parents at arm's length. It forces him into contact with his brother-in-law, which means that we see Gil in his interpersonal struggles, and it's still related to the actual plot that we're following, right? So again, it's never tangential. It's always directly connected to the story. And we're also watching the consequences of the choices he's been making up until we meet him in the story, where we see that, like, his relationship with his brother-in-law is strained because of the way that we met him in the beginning, which was, I expose the truth about people in power. This is what I do. This is all I do. This is everything. And so as we move through the story, we see how this is like, he's really good at this thing, but it means that other aspects, as we meet sort of other aspects of his life, they're falling apart. They're in absolute shambles because he has no idea how to handle these facets of his life. And so that's why we see different facets of Gil, at least for me, without him ever feeling inconsistent, because he's in control in very limited scope of places. But because he has majored in this one thing, it means that everything else is underdeveloped and in a rough shape, right? Because he's also coping with lots of alcohol, a lot of cocaine, and can't really sustain meaningful relationships with other people. The only reason he has a meaningful relationship with Jess is because they work together. They're in the same office, and it's brought them into proximity around a shared interest. And that's the only reason that relationship actually works in the story. Every other relationship is strained and underdeveloped and chaotic and dysfunctional because of where Gil has put all of his time and attention, and he's being forced to confront those facts.
Mm-hmm. I think a couple things on that. The first thing is that I feel like one of the things that I noticed early on in the story is the fact that he wasn't investigating his sister's death originally, right? Like, it really only, it kind of came onto his radar because it's his sister, but it stayed on his radar because it was adjacent and kept crossing paths with the information that he desired and he was pursuing in his career. And I think the choice of Peston to do that helped it in the beginning to feel like, oh, this is just me doing what I would normally do, and maybe I get a little more information on this other thing, until it almost began to flip. And I liked that choice. That is something that I probably would want to sit and think about even more of, like, what that means. But at the end of the day, was very much in alignment with him as a character, because even though he cared, we saw him brush it off, the details of, like, everyone forgets their helmets sometime, like even people who are perfect or whatever. So I felt like in that development of him, that felt like it needed to sort of just be there on the peripheral. Yeah. Until there were so many questions that his natural mind just couldn't let the lack of a clarity of an answer. And he showed it in one scene where he said something to the effect of, I don't want to know. I think he was talking about Kendall. I don't want to know what they said in that room. I want to know what he has over him. And that's like, they could let that could be whatever. I want to know that part. And I felt like that is how his mind operated. And
that's the Gil classic right there.
Exactly. It was like, come on, you know me, I'm writing in the margins. And so that was the first thing. And I thought that was a very intentional choice. I think it was probably a choice that you really had to think through, and you allowed that to be the root so that you had enough time so that the questions and the uncertainty and the lack of information about her death could come to the light. Right. And I think that was done really well. So that was the first thing. The second thing that I want to say, you mentioned something about consistency. I didn't think that there was an inconsistency. Well, let me back up for the people, because you guys are listening to us and we're not just talking. Before we started recording, we normally just have a couple of notes, and I feel like there are parts in the story where I felt that there was an inconsistent delivery of Gil's character, not in like his pursuit and his way of thinking. I just felt like it didn't feel like the same person. like in the way that the writer wrote them. And I'm gonna maybe pick out a couple scenes if I remember correctly. Like the Gil that we had when he was in the beginning at the bar and all of that was kind of like germaphobe, almost fly on the wall, almost robotic in how he's processing his environment. And then if you have, for example, Gil with Marilyn, listen, I was not buying that he was like smooth enough to keep getting and dagging this woman.
Game.
Listen, I just, Mr. Peston, you need to read a couple more romances.
Wait,
I was like,
does the fact that this was like based on mutual like information exchange, did that not like convince you that like it was?
No.
It's like there's no way Gil has enough game for this. That there's not a world in which.
Girl, she looks suspicious, okay? Because in my mind, you have a Poindexter feel, and now you going and you doing a booty call.
You just getting it on the side.
Girl, please.
This is my favorite hot take. In the whole book, you're like, I don't think Gil would have this much game. That is some shenanigans. That is the primary objection to like the plotting, the character development. Everything's fine, but I don't buy that he was getting that much tail.
He ain't the man. So there's that one. That's an example. Another time that I felt like you saw a glimpse of a different version, and I think his consistency was there, but it was just, I felt like a different character. It was like in a scene where it was him and Jess, and they got that letter from my boy's desk. And in that moment, there was such a pull of like mentor mentee of trusting the person. And I'm not saying he was distrusting, but it just didn't have the same feel. And I felt like it could have been due to the camaraderie between them that it caused him to be in a different state of level of comfort. But I don't think that was still the same even like mental wavelength of the Gil that I'm talking about before, and that we saw come back. And another time we saw him come back is when he went to that news office to meet with that other reporter, that they were they were owned by the same people, but they worked in different offices, and their offices had different agendas. That the way his mind was back to that kind of quirky Gil. And I just felt like there was some inconsistencies in that for me, even though he tried to write them in some of those moments with Marilyn, like, oh, she's messy. But I don't think it didn't feel like the same processing of that. And there was another one that was huge. When him and Jess, and maybe it was always with Jess, and maybe that was a sense of comfort with her. I think he was trying to do something between the relationships that he had with women in his life that I felt like it was something else going on there. But remember the time when they left that bar after they sort of antagonized that guy, I can't remember who it was, and then they go outside and he's on the phone and he doesn't realize that they're behind him. That was a different kind of Gil. Like, I felt like he felt way too smooth in some of those moments for the other ones, for him to almost be low-key nerdy Poindexter. Like, he's the guy on the peripheral, and no, you are the guy. And I think the one time when I can recall someone low-key calls him on it, and it wasn't a full call-out, was when Jess was like, when she was bringing up the fact that, like, y'all do, as in... when he was like, oh, yeah, we went to Oxford together. And she says, oh, like y'all. And she, as in, you keep saying all this mess, but that is you. Those are your people. Now, granted, it's not in the full 100% scale, but the whole time he was showing the division in gender, in ethnicity, and then to be in these moments and now beginning to realize, like, the thing that you're going up against, you are that thing. Y'all went to the same schools. The fact that everybody in there in some way or shape, form or another you have a similarity. And he mentioned it, but never at any time fully attributed it to himself when he said, if people knew that all of your people in government and in politics went to the same schools, knew each other, they would be enraged. And he never fully attributed that to himself. And I don't think that that's to the inconsistency, but I think to in those moments, the way his deductiveness, that may not be the right way to say it, I just felt like it was off. And I think that was I think it was on the part of the writer.
Yeah.
Trying to write him in such a way that you didn't keep in the consistency of the way he sort of came off as totally quirky, almost in a sense of isolation in the beginning to me. Versus towards the middle, he kind of sort of feels like he's the man. And even to the point where he just like, oh, I'm like, I don't know those clothes because I'm not from there. But it's almost like, you know, I'm fresh to death in my whatever suit he had on, his jacket, and his. I was like,
Yeah.
Is that how we gonna do it? And I was just like, okay, whatever. But it could have also been an overflow of like a representation of like of belonging, right?
Yeah.
Of you know, brands and types of clothing and types of presentation is an essence of, or a example of me belonging to something. So the point is, that's the way I felt like when I said inconsistencies. And I think in the end, they work themselves out. But to me, as someone having this conversation about writers and how do you move through this, I think it's also being very clear about where the person is in that stage of the story, and not just in where the story is as far as the external goals and the gathering of information and the processing of clues, but where he is on his personal, professional, emotional level, so that when there is a response, conversations, moments, that it is in alignment with where he is in that stage. I think that would just have made those moments even better, because it took me outside of the moment when I'm already struggling to be like,
Yeah.
So yeah, long answer short, I don't know about Player Gil. I don't know if I felt like he was bagging the chicks like that. I don't know if I thought he was just Mr. Smooth. But in the end, like, he can't ride a bike, he can't drive a car, but then he supposed to be Mr. Cool. Girl, I wasn't buying it. Basically.
Yeah. That's so it's really interesting because, again, I like that wasn't something that, like, when I read it, that was like a thing that I flagged or a thing that like took me out of the story, because I'm thinking in terms of, again, Gil as a person. But I'm going to connect this to a point based on what you're saying. But Gil as a person, in his element, because he is at the top of his game in his field as a journalist, it gives him a measure of power and leverage in situations that he can use at any time, essentially. And so that he has sort of like, he has locked in an almost like scientific sense of, if I pull this lever, then this thing happens, because he's been doing it for so long and he knows the players so well in his arena. So that's where you get Gil, I think, looking a little bit more smooth than he is in almost any other scenario, because this is the one thing in his life that he knows. This is the one thing that he knows how to do. And so again, it's that thing where he's really good at this one thing and absolutely terrible at everything else. And like no other part of his life works the way that his work life does. Because, and this is the result of, on the plus side, when he gets into a work situation, he's the man and he's on top of it. But you put him in any other scenario and this dude has got nothing. He's awkward and struggles and doesn't know what to do and feels out of place. Because I think you get this really powerful contrast of, you know, when he goes into an interview with someone in his field, right, and he's talking to, you know, a suspect or an informant or whatever, and he understands what's happening and he's making the calculations and he's, you know, engaging them and playing this kind of game of chess, versus when he tries to talk to his parents, or when he tries to talk to Richard, and all of a sudden he's like, I don't know what to say, this is really awkward, because this is not a part of his life that he has put any time into developing, and that he's basically shut himself off from. So that's kind of the way that plays for me, in the way that we're meant to understand Gil.
I get that. I get that. Yeah, I get that. I think the difference for me is that it's a question of, like, what in fact are the quirks and how do they manifest themselves, right? We have this problem all the time when you talk about authors developing a character. What are their flaws? What are their quirks? What are their habits? And how do they manifest themselves? And I think it's something different of you being in a situation and you not knowing how to handle it versus it being you sort of have a cognitive delay or a sort of I think those things were meant to feel like they were synonymous, but they were not to me. And so I got the rhythm of you're in your zone, like you're in your zone of genius and you are doing your thing. But there are times where I felt like they were trying to make it seem like he had some sort of other, not a delay. Y'all, I'm sorry that I don't have a better word for it, but I do get what you're saying. And I did sense that and see that. And I also, I feel like I also seen it in certain scenes, like the scene where he was with the guy with, when he was called in, I think it was when he went to Media Corps, when he went in the one with the dog story.
Yes.
Oh, you know what I'm talking about? When he went into the meeting. And the guy was like, hey, like big booming voice. And he felt kind of comfortable, but he didn't kind of feel comfortable. And then when they started talking and he sort of got into his rhythm, like he warmed up. Because at first the hesitancy was like, I'm in a different situation. I'm still kind of trying to read the room. I don't even know why I'm here. And I think that's something different than a cognitive disconnect, right? Yeah. That is just, I'm uncomfortable in this space. But then you started seeing the comfort when they started talking about what he would normally talk about and him giving in the input as how he's seen it. And then when he got to the point where he warmed up enough to push past the boundaries of the conversation, almost to the point where whether or not he knows how to read a room effectively, right? Or like he pushes past intentionally to try to get to an answer that he really wanted, because this is the people that he would have got it, and it sort of inflamed old boy that he pounds the desk and like, if you say anything like that again, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, I think that there is something different about the processing mentally there and the interaction and engagement there than having those moments where, for example, I guess I would think if you were someone that had ADHD, or if you were someone that you were on a spectrum of autism or something like that, in how you handle a situation versus it being a level of comfort or discomfort because you're in a power dynamic that you are unaware of and you're not quite sure how to maneuver it until they intentionally pulled him in to get his take, because they're still trying to low-key kind of milk him to see what he's doing. And then he sort of gets into his bag and almost gets into that part where he's still working that gray area of how far to push it, and it's now the time to do it. And that also he's wrestling with. Does that make sense?
It does. I know that, like, also, you know, as a factor in the story, right? Like, so, and they like say this outright, right? Like, Gil has diagnosed OCD. And so that is like a part of the way that he navigates the world, you know, to his benefit or to his detriment, you know, as he kind of like struggles through the world. I think like one of my takeaways, like kind of in this conversation, or one of the things that I kind of think is important for writers, is when you're trying to make complex characters, not trying to like not trying to make them so complex that they do feel inconsistent and that they aren't coming across on the, because I think, Robert Peston, again, even though he's new to fiction, he's very experienced as a journalist. He had editors that he worked with and all of that stuff as being someone traditionally published. And so he really, you're looking at an experienced writer writing a complex character. And even so, like, it landed okay for me, but it didn't land necessarily so well for you. And so, but like for writers, especially newer writers, being mindful of, I think, when I think about working with a character and like working on like their flaws, I think about narrowing in on like a specific zone, so that you have a wound or you have a flaw, and then what you're doing is you're looking at different facets of that flaw versus trying to do too many things in one character where they have like not just multiple flaws, but like, they have all these different facets so that they almost don't feel like the same character moving through the story. And that's something that, because I think that sometimes when we're trying to make realistic characters, we're going off of what we know about real people, which is that people can kind of have some contradictions in them, and that's quite normal for people to embody certain contradictions, or for people to have loads of different facets of their lives, and wanting to sort of develop all these different things about a character that are cluttering who that character is and their individual transformation, rather than focusing in on what this story is meant to challenge within this character. And when you're looking at a flaw, because this is one thing that I highlighted that I really want to make sure that people take away from this, because one of the things I said earlier was, you have Gil, and he's trying to make better choices, and sometimes he does, sometimes he succeeds and sometimes he fails. But what we don't have is Gil making the same mistake in the same place over and over and over again. Instead, we see we see the same flaw or flaws in Gil, or the same wound in Gil, manifesting in different ways, in different instances. And that's, I think, something that writers should really focus on, is like, we're looking at facets of the same flaw or the same wound playing out possibly in different scenarios and having different implications, rather than, because you'll see this a lot of times in either in an early draft or in just a more inexperienced writer, where what happens instead is the person just kind of goes in circles, right, on a thing. It's almost like when you have two characters and they're arguing, but they're like, I know you're not, or I know you are, but what am I? Or, whatever. And they're just moving in circles. And what you end up with is an insufferable protagonist who like won't shut up or won't change, or like just keeps making the same mistake. And it gets super annoying, versus watching different facets of a protagonist struggle unfold and watching them wrestle with that flaw in different scenarios. And that's something that we see with Gil, where he will make the wrong choice, or he will, make mistakes, but he's not just circling on the same mistake all the time in the same ways, but we're seeing it manifest differently. So there's kind of two separate things I'm saying here is, when you're developing characters and you want them to be complex, be mindful of trying to make them over complex so that they come out on the page and they feel like a different character in every scene when we meet them. But also, when you're working with flaws or wounds, make sure that you're looking at that flaw or wound from different angles and different facets, so that you're developing complexity around that flaw and not running the reader in circles and driving them crazy by just repeat mistakes in the same, where they just keep making the same mistake. So those are kind of two of the threads I want to pull out based on kind of what you were saying and things that writers should be mindful of when they're writing characters.
I totally agree. I think this is probably the area where, if I had to put it together in a statement based on what we're talking about here, this would be the time where you really want to think like a writer. Right? Like, you want your characters to feel real, but we cannot explore every single possible thing that could possibly happen in this scenario, or it'd be too much. And you have to know what is the end goal here, or what is it that we're trying to deliver, so that that delivery is crisp and it is dead on. And it's like, that can be a challenge if you're aiming for complex character, complex plot, and you're given all these doodads and, whatever. And so I think that part of it would be, and therefore, if you're aiming for complex plot and complex character, leaning in on having the fractured wound and looking at it from multiple angles and multiple ways in which they present themselves, and that the trifill cycle is not in fact the same thing, but an evolution, or them getting to the heart of it, helps you to have the complex character without overly complicating it.
Yes.
I'm wrong for using that same word in the same sentence 3 times, but if you pause and rewind, you'll get what I'm saying.
You'll get it.
You'll get it in the car. So I think that's the part where you can have complex character, but what happens is you are sort of simplifying in which the lens that we're seeing them, so that when they're going through that trifill cycle, he's getting a clue, he's processing it, 25% of it was right, 75% wasn't. Next time it might be 50. Next time it might be 75, as an example. And what that allows you to do is still give that depth, but also give us clarity. And it makes it so that we, the reader, are on board for it, because we see that they're trying. That's what trying looks like.
Exactly.
We see that they're learning, but they're not 100% there. And that's where we can get on board, even if we don't air quote like that person. I mean, that's relative. Or even if we don't relate, again, that's relative. But we've all been in situations where we're trying to get it right. We're not all the way there, but we did try. And we're still learning what those differences are to get to our desired end goal. And so with that said, as we come towards the end of this, I do want to say that this story, which we've said in general, really does have a sense of complexity when it comes to his relationship with himself, his relationship with his family, his relationship with his sister and his brother-in-law and his nephews, his relationship with the people in his life, everything from those that are close to him, like his assistant Jess, or someone who's intimate with him physically, like Marilyn, all the way to the people that he encounters in these newsrooms and the people that he rely on for information. And in all of those places, they sort of merge into who we see Gil as far as the man, the brother, him and his family, him and his profession. And the reality is, in this story, he earns that transformation because that is the part that it delivers. And while being very, I don't want to say colorful, but while being very informative, like it was very interesting. Listen, I have no desire to be in the midst of politics. Not even with my own country. However, right. But
honestly, it's a wonder that you could get me interested in a book like this as someone who is right there with you. We're over here. We're in fantasy land and we like it here. We're happy to be here, hang out here.
A little bit delulu, but it's all good. And so I think it was fascinating. And I think that's where Peston's profession is shown through. Like he was on all tens, and it made it so that it was fascinating, and it did give us a behind the curtains sort of look at this world that you wouldn't have encountered any other way. And I think that made for a very interesting backdrop, and it also made for a very interesting time for him to have to experience this change when so much of what was important to him, his career, was riding on these very specific days.
Yeah.
It was a tight like window. And I thought that was been very making some very intelligent choices as a writer. Mm-hmm. It was just, that was good, like really good. And I don't think a lot of people would have been able to pull it off. So I have to totally respect that. Even if I was just like, you're killing me.
We can roll with that. I respect it even while I'm like, oh, are we really doing this? Am I really here right now? I think that is completely fair. And it's something that I appreciate about you so much, because I know I was like, Dana, I know this isn't going to be like a book that you're into. And this is going to be what it's going to be.
Listen, she was marked up. Y'all, your girl got notes and stuff, even when I didn't know what was going on.
So that's something that I appreciate so much about you. So you're like, listen, this is not a ride for me, but I respect the hell out of your game, okay?
Listen, Rachel, I will not drop, but I will be your shotgun, okay? You know I'll be rolling with you. I'll be like, this girl, I'll be like, she gonna have me on this podcast look like all I do is read is smut. Okay, maybe, but not all the time. Oh my gosh, not all the time. Maybe, not really. Okay, so with that said, as we get ready to wrap this up, I think this has been a great conversation. I think we're totally clear that this is a very complex character, and because of his journey and the other nuances of this story that we talked about in the plot, you do have a lot of secondary characters. You have a lot of supporting characters, and but I do feel like he managed. And you may say this in a better way. I feel like he managed to write this story as if we were in the bubble of Gil's head, and not just because of his choice of first person POV, but in how he saw people, how he engaged people, sometimes how he used people. And that is both skill and decision. And that is another one of those areas where I was like, it felt like we were in the bubble of his head. And I really liked that. I mean, I didn't like being in his head, but I liked the tactic.
I appreciate the honesty. I don't want to be in his head. That wasn't really for me, but I respect the game. So this is something I think that's really important. And something that Peston does really well, and I think it's something that any writer can take away for their line writing in particular, is we are in first person. And I think especially because, most romance writers are writing in first person. So even romance writers, there's something to take away here, is that Gil describes people in Gil's terms. We are in first person, we are in Gil's head, and it means that we see the world specifically the way that Gil does. And that is the unique opportunity of a first person narrator, because when Gil describes people, he describes them according to their role in his world, what their achievements are, what kind of connections they have. So we get both kind of intriguing and story relevant and Gil filtered backgrounds on the individual characters that we meet. And so while we're learning something about the character, we're also learning something about Gil, because this is showing us how Gil sizes people up and what Gil's opinions on those people are, and that shapes the way that he describes them. And when you're particularly in a first person narrator, Sharp Objects is another book that does this really well. That's just a quick aside, because it's actually also a journalist and in first person. But it really gives you, it gives flavor to every character, but it also gives you flavor of the person who's describing them, because it tells us as much about the other person as it tells us about the character who's describing them, because of the way that they size them up and the way that they look at them and the kinds of language even that they use to describe them. So this book is a really great look at a strong first person narrator and using that to influence your actual line by line writing.
I love it. I'm gonna make my mouth line up with my brain. I totally agree. I love how you also said, I know that this is something that we talked about when we were talking, reading Ninth House as well. I also love the fact that even in his sizing up and describing people, it was even this layer of like hierarchy and power that he just saw as a person, and that it factored into how he went in. And I think we in some ways do that as people, but to be able to write it in such a way that that is ingrained into how he not only how he asked questions, what did he lead with? Even when he was in that one interview and he was like, oh, I had about 30 questions. I only got like 2.5 done, but I got exactly what I needed. And it was this thing. Or even when people's talking to him and he's trying to decide, okay, are they playing me or are they on the up and up? Like, it's just, so that was the isms about him that I really liked, because not only did it show his character, but I think it showed a lot about the writing style of this story. Any final things before we get ready to wrap this baby up?
Yes. Man, our podcast episodes are getting longer and longer and longer. So they're like a tight 1 hour, and then they're squeezing past an hour, and now we're at nearly an hour and a half length episodes.
Go, ma'am.
I shouldn't be allowed to look at the timer. And I normally have it off, but now it's automatically on the thing, and I can't. And now I just see it. Speaking of isms, man. So I just want to kind of streamline into just like a couple of takeaways or questions to ask yourself. Number one, as you're thinking about creating a complex character, if that's something you're trying to do think of it, just like you said, Dana, think of it as a writer, approach it as a writer, knowing that, yes, we want them to be complex, but you need to streamline that process. Like, you're not going to explore every weird little facet of them. So you need to streamline it so that it stays in line with the plot and the transformation of the protagonist, to keep yourself focused so that the reader can go on, because you're taking one ride. They are going on a single ride, so take them on that one ride. And likewise, when you have a protagonist confronting their flaws and making mistakes, if you're either plotting or if you're looking at a draft, if you're revising, check yourself. Are they making the same mistakes over and over again in the same way, right? Because, conversely, are you showing different facets of their flaws through the situations they're facing in the story, and then using that as an opportunity to show where they are in their growth as they're going through the story? Because this can be the key to your protagonist being frustrating and your protagonist being sympathetic and a person who's just not done transforming yet. So those are probably a couple of my big takeaways for when you're dealing with characters, streamlining and also making sure that you're looking at them from different facets, so that we're not just watching them run in circles, because it'll make your readers crazy.
We're about to close this baby. I think the one thing that I would add to that is, as someone who, if you are someone who is desiring to write something like this or to pursue something that has this level of depth and complexity, you're not going to do it on your first try. You're not going to do it on your first try. I don't care who you are. And I think it's something to be said to know that that is your goal, and to give yourself the opportunity to grow into that. So it may be maybe that you, on one story, you aim to do the complexity in his scope of the world, or how they maneuver the world, and maybe, or a time that is complexity of character with a simple plot, and almost playing with those elements, so that you get the opportunity to build that muscle before you decide to go to another thing. And and you can tell that he is a very gifted and skilled writer. I would really, having a conversation with his editor probably would be amazing. And I think sometimes it was a little bit, probably overkill a little bit, which is where you may lose some people, because there is still a difference between reality and being able to have something on a page, so that you don't lose us. But if that is what you desire, not to lose us, but to deliver, is to look at them almost in isolation and then look at how they play well together and how, when playing together, they make each other stronger, because those are deliberate choices, and it grows with time. So with that said, we are about to bounce. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Story Deep Dive as we discuss characters in The Whistleblower. And then we will see you on our next episode when we will be bringing this all together with our editor's takes. And we would really love for you to interact and engage with us by visiting us online at storydeepdive.com. With that said, we are out. Take care. And as always, happy writing. Goodbye.